The fluorescent lights of Pierce Associates hummed their familiar tune as Monét Daniels smoothed her pencil skirt and checked her reflection in the elevator's polished doors. Her wavy hair cascaded perfectly over her shoulders, and her sharp features were set with the kind of determination that had carried her through Harvard Law and into one of Chicago's most prestigious consulting firms. At 28, she had built a reputation for being unshakable, sophisticated, classy, and ambitious to her core. But as the elevator climbed to the 32nd floor, something fluttered in her chest that had nothing to do with career aspirations and everything to do with the man she knew would be waiting in the conference room. Gavin Sinclair. Even thinking his name sent a familiar warmth through her caramel-toned skin. He had joined the firm 6 months ago as senior strategic advisor, and from the moment those piercing eyes had met hers across the crowded welcome reception, Monét had felt something shift in her perfectly ordered world. Dark-haired and devastatingly handsome, with a lean frame that wore expensive suits like they were crafted specifically for him, Gavin possessed an intensity that made every conversation feel like a secret being shared between conspirators. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and Monét stepped onto the marble floors of the executive level. Her heels clicked a steady rhythm as she walked toward conference room A, her heart already racing with anticipation. These late-night strategy sessions had become the highlight of her weeks, ostensibly about the Morrison account, but really about the electric tension that crackled between them like lightning seeking ground. She pushed open the heavy oak door and found him there, as always, sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms, his tie loosened just enough to suggest vulnerability beneath the professional armor. His laptop screen cast a blue glow across his angular features, and when he looked up at her approach, the smile that spread across his face was like sunrise after the longest night. "You're early," he said, his voice carrying that slight rasp that made her stomach flutter. "So are you," she replied, settling into the chair across from him. The table between them felt both like a necessary barrier and an impossible distance. For weeks now, they had danced around what was building between them. Lingering looks during meetings, hands that brushed when passing documents, conversations that stretched far beyond the professional into the personal. Monét had learned that beneath Gavin's mysterious exterior lay a man who quoted Neruda and knew the names of every barista in the building. He had discovered that her sophisticated facade concealed someone who laughed until tears streamed down her face at terrible jokes and who had once spent an entire weekend teaching her nephew to tie his shoes. Tonight felt different, though. The air itself seemed charged with possibility. "I've been thinking," Gavin began, closing his laptop and leaning forward. His piercing eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "About the Morrison presentation, about other things." Monét's pulse quickened. She had been thinking, too, about the way his laugh rumbled through his chest, about the gentleness in his hands when he helped her with her coat, about the careful way he listened when she spoke as if every word mattered. "What other things?" she asked softly, though they both knew the answer. He stood then, moving around the table with the fluid grace of a man entirely comfortable in his own skin. When he reached her chair, he extended his hand. "Dance with me." "There's no music," she whispered, but she was already taking his hand, already allowing him to pull her to her feet. "There's always music," he murmured, and suddenly his arms were around her waist, and hers were circling his neck, and they were swaying to a rhythm only they could hear. The conference room, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering Chicago skyline, became their private ballroom. The city lights twinkled like stars brought down to earth, and in that moment, Monét felt like she was floating among them. "Monét," Gavin whispered her name like a prayer, and she tilted her head up to meet his gaze. His eyes were dark with something that made her entire body come alive. "Yes?" The word was barely a breath. "I'm falling for you," he said simply, and the honesty in his voice broke something open in her chest. "I've been fighting it for months, telling myself it's complicated, that we work together, that I should be more careful. But I can't stop thinking about you, about us." Tears pricked at her eyes, not of sadness, but of relief so profound it almost brought her to her knees. "Gavin, you don't have to say anything," he said quickly, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "I just needed you to know." But she shook her head, her own hands framing his face. "Yes, I do, because I've been falling too. So hard it scares me. I've built my whole life on control, on having everything planned and perfect, and then you walked in and turned it all upside down." His smile was radiant. "Is that such a bad thing?" "Terrifying," she admitted. "And wonderful. When he kissed her, it was with a tenderness that made her soul ache. His lips were warm and sure, and she melted into him completely, every defense she had ever built crumbling in the space of a heartbeat. She could taste the coffee he had been drinking, could feel the slight tremor in his hands as they tangled in her hair, could hear the soft sound he made when she kissed him back with equal fervor. They broke apart breathless, foreheads touching, sharing the same air. "This changes everything," she whispered. "Everything," he agreed, and kissed her again. 2 months later. The autumn Chicago wind whipped through Monet's hair as she hurried across the plaza toward Pierce Associates. She was running late, an unusual occurrence for someone who prided herself on punctuality, but she couldn't bring herself to care. The reason for her tardiness brought a secret smile to her lips. Gavin had surprised her with breakfast in bed, complete with fresh flowers and her favorite French press coffee. The morning had stretched languidly, filled with whispered conversations and the kind of intimacy that still made her marvel at how completely her life had transformed. Their relationship had blossomed with an intensity that left her breathless. What had begun as stolen moments in conference rooms had evolved into something deep and consuming. Gavin would show up at her apartment with Thai takeout and terrible action movies. She would leave notes in his briefcase that made him smile during the most tedious board meetings. They had developed their own language of glances and touches that spoke volumes across crowded rooms. The elevator ride to her floor felt interminable, and when the doors finally opened, she practically floated to her desk. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting everything in a golden glow that matched her mood perfectly. "Someone's in a good mood," observed her colleague, Janet Wu, from the neighboring desk. Janet was sharp-eyed and pragmatic, with prematurely silver hair that she wore like a crown, and a wit that could cut glass. "Is it that obvious?" Monet asked, settling into her chair and powering up her computer. "You're practically glowing. Let me guess, tall, dark, and mysterious from the 32nd floor?" Heat bloomed across Monet's cheekbones. She and Gavin had been discreet, but apparently not discreet enough. "I don't know what you're talking about." Janet's knowing smile said otherwise. "Honey, I've been in corporate America for 15 years. I can spot a workplace romance from 3 floors away. Just be careful, okay? Office relationships can get complicated fast." Before Monet could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from Gavin. "Missing you already. Can't wait for dinner tonight. I have something important to tell you." Her heart skipped. Something important could mean anything. A new client, a promotion, or perhaps... Her mind wandered to possibilities that made her pulse race. The morning flew by in a blur of client calls and document reviews, but her thoughts kept drifting upward to the 32nd floor. To Gavin's office with its leather chairs and the small succulent she had given him that sat on his windowsill like a promise. It wasn't until just after lunch that her perfect world began to crack. The call came from her direct supervisor, Patricia Henley, a woman whose steel gray bob and rimless glasses masked a brilliant legal mind. "Monet, I need to see you in my office now." The tone sent a chill down Monet's spine. Patricia's voice carried none of its usual warmth, instead holding the kind of professional distance that preceded uncomfortable conversations. Monet's heels clicked against the hardwood floors as she made her way to Patricia's corner office. Through the glass walls, she could see her supervisor sitting rigidly behind her mahogany desk, her expression unreadable. "Close the door and have a seat," Patricia said without preamble. Monet did as instructed, her mind racing through possible explanations. Had she missed a deadline, made an error on the Morrison account? The knot in her stomach tightened with each passing second. Patricia studied her for a long moment, her fingers steepled in front of her. "Monet, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need a direct answer. Are you involved in any kind of relationship with Gavin Sinclair?" The blood drained from Monet's face. They had been so careful, so professional during work hours. How could Patricia possibly know? What do you mean by involved?" she asked, stalling for time. "I think you know exactly what I mean." Patricia's voice was sharp enough to cut. "Are you romantically involved with Mr. Sinclair?" Monet's throat felt desert dry. The truth sat heavy on her tongue, but something in Patricia's expression warned her to tread carefully. "Why are you asking?" "Because," Patricia said, sliding a manila folder across the desk, "we have reason to believe that Mr. Sinclair may not be who he claims to be." With trembling fingers, Monet opened the folder. Inside were photographs, surveillance photos by the look of them, showing Gavin entering and leaving various buildings around the city. There were copies of documents with letterheads she didn't recognize, phone records, and what appeared to be bank statements. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Patricia leaned forward, her expression grave. "We have credible intelligence suggesting that Mr. Sinclair may be conducting industrial espionage, stealing trade secrets, client information, proprietary strategies, and potentially using his relationship with you to do it." The words hit Monét like physical blows. The folder slipped from her nerveless fingers, scattering its contents across Patricia's desk. Her mind reeled, trying to process what she was hearing while simultaneously rejecting it completely. "That's impossible," she said, her voice gaining strength. "You don't know him. He would never—" "Wouldn't he?" Patricia's interruption was gentle but firm. "Tell me, has he ever asked you about your clients? Shown unusual interest in your cases? Suggested late-night work sessions where he might have access to sensitive materials?" Each question was like a knife twist. The late-night strategy sessions, his interest in her work, the way he always seemed to know exactly the right questions to ask about her cases. No, she was being paranoid. This was Gavin, the man who brought her coffee in the morning, who listened to her fears about her mother's health, who had held her while she cried over losing the Henderson contract. "You're wrong," she said firmly, standing so abruptly that her chair rolled backward. "Whatever intelligence you think you have, it's wrong. Gavin isn't a spy. He's what, Monét? The man you're in love with?" Patricia's voice softened with something that might have been pity. "I understand this is difficult to hear, but we need to consider the possibility that your feelings may be compromising your judgment." The office suddenly felt too small, the air too thin. Monét's perfectly ordered world was crumbling around her, and she couldn't seem to catch her breath. "I need to talk to him," she said, already moving toward the door. "Monét, wait." Patricia's voice stopped her with her hand on the doorknob. "If our suspicions are correct, confronting him directly could be dangerous. Not just for you, but for the entire firm. And if you're wrong," Monét turned back, her eyes blazing with protective fury. "If you're destroying an innocent man's reputation based on circumstantial evidence and paranoid theories?" Patricia sighed, suddenly looking older than her 55 years. "Then we'll deal with the consequences. But until we know for certain, I'm asking you to keep this conversation confidential. Can you do that?" Monét stared at her supervisor for a long moment, her mind warring with her heart. Everything logical told her to trust Patricia's judgment. The woman had navigated corporate politics for decades and had never steered her wrong. But everything emotional screamed that this was impossible, that the man she had fallen so completely for couldn't be a lie. "Fine," she said finally, "but I won't stop seeing him based on suspicions alone." Patricia nodded slowly. "Just be careful and be observant. If there's any truth to these allegations, you may be our best chance of uncovering it." The words followed Monét out of the office and haunted her for the rest of the afternoon. Every interaction with Gavin suddenly took on sinister undertones in her memory. His mysterious past that he never liked to discuss. The way he sometimes seemed to know things about her clients that she hadn't told him. His habit of working late when the office was nearly empty. By the time 6 o'clock rolled around, she felt like she was going to be sick. Her phone buzzed. "Ready for dinner? I made reservations at that little Italian place you love." Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long moment before she typed back, "Can't wait." But as she gathered her things and headed for the elevator, Monét felt like she was walking toward either salvation or destruction, and she had no idea which it would be. The flickering candlelight at Rossetti's cast dancing shadows across Gavin's face as he reached across the small table to take Monét's hand. The intimate Italian restaurant had always been their sanctuary, a place where the outside world couldn't touch them, where they could simply be Gavin and Monét, not colleagues or professionals, just two people hopelessly in love. Tonight, however, the warm ambiance felt suffocating rather than romantic. Every gesture of his that had once made her heart race now felt loaded with potential deception. When he smiled at her across the table, she found herself studying his expression for signs of duplicity rather than basking in its warmth. "You're quiet tonight," he observed, his thumb tracing circles across her knuckles. The gesture that usually made her melt now felt like manipulation. "Everything okay?" Monét forced a smile. "Just a long day at the office. Want to talk about it?" His piercing eyes held hers with that familiar intensity. But now she wondered if he was searching for information rather than offering comfort. The waiter appeared with their wine, a bottle of Barolo that Gavin had chosen, demonstrating his usual impeccable taste. As he poured, Monét watched her lover's face, looking for any crack in the facade, any hint of the spy Patricia believed him to be. "Actually," she said carefully, "Patricia asked me some strange questions today. About you." Gavin's hand stilled for just a fraction of a second, so briefly that she might have imagined it. "About me? What kind of questions?" She wanted to know if we were romantically involved. Monét watched his reaction closely. Someone apparently saw us together outside of work. Relief flooded his features. Too much relief, she thought. "Is that all? I was worried it was something serious." He lifted his wineglass in a toast. To office gossip and the people who have nothing better to do than speculate about other people's love lives. But Monét didn't raise her glass. "Is that really all it was, Gavin?" Something shifted in his expression. The easy charm faltered for just a moment, replaced by something sharper, more calculating. "What do you mean?" Her heart hammered against her ribs as she made her choice. "I mean, is there anything you want to tell me? About why you're really at Pierce Associates?" The silence stretched between them like a chasm. The sounds of the restaurant, clinking glasses, muted conversations, the soft jazz playing overhead, seemed to fade into background static. Gavin set down his wineglass with deliberate precision, and when he looked at her again, she saw a stranger looking back. "What exactly are you asking me, Monét?" The formal use of her name was like a slap. Gone was the gentle way he usually said it, like a caress. This was cold, professional, distant. "I'm asking if you're using me." The words came out in a rush, each one feeling like she was tearing out a piece of her own heart. "I'm asking if everything between us is a lie. I'm asking if you're a spy." The transformation was immediate and devastating. The warm, loving man she had fallen for disappeared entirely, replaced by someone cold and calculating. His posture straightened, his expression hardened, and suddenly she was looking at a complete stranger. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said quietly. But there was steel beneath the words. "Don't I?" Tears blurred her vision, but she blinked them back fiercely. "The late-night work sessions. The questions about my clients. The way you always seem to know just the right things to say to get me to open up about my cases." "Monét, was any of it real?" The question burst out of her like a dam breaking. "Did you ever actually care about me, or was I just a convenient source of information?" For a moment, his facade cracked, and she saw something raw and desperate in his eyes. "Of course it was real. My feelings for you are the most real thing in my life." But she could hear it in his voice, the qualification that was coming. He was quiet for so long she wondered if he was going to answer at all. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "But Patricia is right to be suspicious." The admission hit her like a physical blow. She actually gasped, her hand flying to her chest as if she could hold her breaking heart together through sheer force of will. "Oh God," she whispered. "It's not what you think," he said urgently, leaning forward. "Let me explain. What is there to explain?" She stood so abruptly that her chair scraped loudly against the floor, drawing stares from other diners. "You lied to me. You used me. You made me fall in love with you while you were stealing from my company." "Monét, please, sit down. Let me tell you the whole truth." But she was already grabbing her purse, her hands shaking so badly she could barely manage the simple task. "The whole truth? Which truth would that be, Gavin? Or is Gavin even your real name?" The pain that flashed across his features might have been genuine, but she couldn't trust her judgment anymore. How could she, when she had been so spectacularly wrong about everything else? "My name is real," he said quietly, "and my feelings for you are real. That's what makes this so complicated." She laughed, but it was a bitter sound with no humor in it. "Complicated. Right. Well, let me uncomplicate things for you." She leaned down, bringing her face close to his. "Stay away from me. Don't call me, don't text me, don't even look at me at work. Whatever game you're playing, I'm out. You don't understand. I understand perfectly." She straightened, drawing on every ounce of dignity she possessed. "I understand that I was an idiot who fell for a lie. But I won't be an idiot twice." She turned and walked toward the exit, her head held high despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. Behind her, she heard Gavin call her name. heard his chair scrape as he started to follow, but she didn't look back. Outside the restaurant, the cool October air hit her like a shock. She fumbled for her phone to call an Uber, her vision blurred by tears and her hands shaking with a combination of heartbreak and fury. As she waited for her ride, she caught a glimpse of Gavin through the restaurant window. He was still sitting at their table, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. For just a moment, her heart clenched with the instinct to go back, to comfort him, to demand a fuller explanation. But then she remembered Patricia's words about industrial espionage, about stolen trade secrets, about the very real possibility that everything she had felt was built on lies. She turned away from the window and waited for her escape. The Uber ride home passed in a blur of city lights and silent tears. In the span of 2 hours, her world had gone from perfectly ordered to completely shattered. The man she loved was a liar and possibly a criminal. The relationship that had become the center of her universe was a carefully constructed facade. By the time she reached her apartment, numbness was setting in. She poured herself a large glass of wine, changed into her softest pajamas, and curled up on her couch with her phone in her hand. Part of her hoped it would ring, hoped that Gavin would call with some miraculous explanation that would make everything make sense again. But it remained stubbornly silent. As the night wore on and the wine dulled the sharp edges of her pain, Monét found herself replaying every moment of their relationship, looking for signs she had missed, the way he had appeared in her life so suddenly and fit so perfectly. His vague answers about his past, the convenient timing of their meetings that always seemed to coincide with her biggest cases. How could she have been so blind? But even as the logical part of her mind catalogued the evidence against him, her heart whispered treacherous doubts. The gentleness in his touch when he thought she was sleeping. The way his voice broke when he said he loved her. The tears she had seen in his eyes tonight when she walked away. Could someone fake emotion that completely? Could a professional liar manufacture the kind of vulnerability she had witnessed in his unguarded moments? She fell asleep on the couch clutching her phone, hoping against hope that morning would bring answers. Or at least some clarity to the wreckage of her heart. 3 weeks passed in a haze of professional efficiency and personal devastation. Monét threw herself into her work with an intensity that impressed even Patricia, taking on new cases and staying late into the night to avoid going home to an apartment that still smelled like Gavin's cologne, and echoed with memories of his laughter. At the office, they moved around each other like ghosts. She would catch glimpses of him in the elevator, see his dark hair disappearing around corners, hear his voice drifting from conference rooms. But they never spoke, never acknowledged each other beyond the most basic professional necessity. The avoidance was torture, but it was a necessary kind of pain, like not touching a wound so it could heal properly. It was on a gray Thursday morning that everything changed again. Monét was reviewing contracts in her office when Janet Wu appeared in her doorway, her expression uncharacteristically serious. "There's something you need to see," she said without preamble, holding up her tablet. "If this is another article about workplace productivity, I'm not interested," Monét said without looking up from her documents. "It's about Gavin." The name hit her like a physical blow, and despite herself, Monét's head snapped up. "What about him?" Janet stepped into the office and closed the door behind her. "I've been doing some digging. Don't give me that look. You know I can't resist a good mystery. And what I found, well, it's not what you'd expect." She set the tablet down on Monét's desk, and what Monét saw made her blood run cold. It was a newspaper article from 2 years ago, the headline reading, "Whistleblower testifies in major corporate fraud case." But it wasn't the headline that made her heart stop. It was the photograph accompanying the article. Gavin's face stared back at her from the screen, but younger, with shorter hair and a haunted expression she had never seen before. "That's," she whispered. "Gavin Sinclair," Janet confirmed. "Real name, real person, real hero." According to this article, and about a dozen others I found, he worked for Meridian Industries as a senior analyst. When he discovered that the company was systematically defrauding its clients and pension funds, he gathered evidence and turned whistleblower. Monét's hands shook as she scrolled through the article. The details painted a picture of a man who had risked everything to expose corruption, his job, his reputation, his safety. "There's more," Janet said quietly. After his testimony put several executives in prison, Meridian went after him. Lawsuits, character assassination, death threats. He had to disappear for a while, start over somewhere new. "Chicago," Monét breathed. Chicago, Janet confirmed, under his real name but with a carefully constructed new identity. New job history, new references, new life. Monét stared at the screen, her mind reeling. But the surveillance photos, the suspicions about industrial espionage, I think I know what that's about too. Janet pulled up another screen, this one showing a series of financial records. Remember the Morrison account? The one you and Gavin have been working on? Of course she remembered. It had been their excuse for all those late-night meetings, the cover story for their growing relationship. I did some checking. Morrison Industries has ties to several companies that were implicated in the Meridian scandal. If Gavin was gathering evidence of continued fraud or corruption, it might look like industrial espionage to someone who didn't know the full story. The pieces began clicking into place with sickening clarity. Gavin's mysterious behavior, his interest in her cases, his late-night work sessions. What if he hadn't been stealing from Pierce Associates, but trying to expose another corporate conspiracy? Oh, God, Monét whispered, sinking back in her chair. I accused him of being a spy. Honey, Janet said gently, you didn't know. How could you? He wasn't exactly forthcoming with the truth. But Monét was barely listening. She was remembering the look in Gavin's eyes that night at the restaurant. Not the cold calculation she had thought she saw, but devastation. The devastation of a man who had been trying to protect both her and the integrity of her firm, only to be accused by the woman he loved of the very corruption he had spent years fighting. I have to find him, she said, already reaching for her purse. Monét, wait. But she was already gone, racing toward the elevator with an urgency that bordered on panic. She had to find Gavin, had to apologize, had to somehow undo the damage her accusations had caused. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor felt like it took hours. When the doors finally opened, she practically ran down the hallway to his office, her heart hammering against her ribs with hope and terror in equal measure. But when she reached his door, it was standing open, and the office was empty. Not just empty, cleared out. The desk was bare except for a computer monitor and a phone. The personal touches that had made it his, the succulent she had given him, the framed photo of his sister, the books on leadership and ethics were all gone. He resigned yesterday. She spun around to find Thomas Kirk, one of the senior partners, standing in the doorway. His expression was sympathetic but final. Resigned? She echoed faintly. Effective immediately. Said he had accepted a position with another firm. Thomas paused, studying her face. I take it this comes as a surprise? Monét nodded wordlessly, not trusting her voice. I'm sorry, my dear. I know you two worked closely together. If only he knew how completely inadequate those words were to describe what she had lost. After Thomas left, Monét stood alone in Gavin's empty office, surrounded by the ghost of what had been. She pulled out her phone and dialed his number, but it went straight to voicemail, a generic recording that didn't even sound like him. She tried texting. Please call me, I know the truth now, I'm sorry. The message showed as delivered, but no response came. Over the next several days, she tried everything she could think of to reach him. She called his apartment building, but the doorman informed her that Mr. Sinclair had moved out. She reached out to mutual acquaintances, but no one seemed to know where he had gone. It was as if he had simply vanished from her life as suddenly as he had appeared. The irony wasn't lost on her. The man she had accused of being deceptive had proven to be exactly what he claimed to be. Someone running from a dangerous past, trying to build a new life, willing to sacrifice everything to protect the people he cared about. And in her fear and confusion, she had driven him away just when he needed her support the most. The guilt was overwhelming, but underneath it was something even worse. The devastating realization that she had lost the love of her life through her own inability to trust. 6 months later, spring in Chicago brought with it a sense of renewal that felt mocking to Monét as she walked through Grant Park on a particularly warm April afternoon. The trees were budding, the flowers were blooming, and couples were scattered across the grass enjoying picnics in each other's company. It was the kind of day that should have lifted her spirits, but instead it only served to remind her of everything she had lost. 6 months. 6 months since that terrible night at Rossetti's, since she had walked away from the best thing that had ever happened to her based on fear and suspicion. 6 months of wondering where he was, if he was safe, if he ever thought of her with anything other than hurt and betrayal. She had thrown herself into her career with single-minded determination, earning a promotion and a corner office that would have thrilled her a year ago. But success felt hollow when there was no one to share it with, no one whose proud smile could make all the long hours worthwhile. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister. "Still on for dinner tonight? I promise not to mention you-know-who." Monét smiled despite herself. Her family had been endlessly patient with her heartbreak, even when she couldn't explain the full story of why she was so devastated. How could she tell them that she had fallen in love with a man who turned out to be a hero, only to destroy that love through her own lack of faith? She was typing back a response when a familiar laugh made her freeze. That laugh, deep, warm, tinged with genuine amusement, was as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. She had heard it in her dreams for months, had woken up reaching for a phantom presence that was never there. Slowly, afraid she was hallucinating, she turned toward the sound, and there he was. Gavin sat on a bench about 50 yards away, his dark hair glinting in the sunlight. His lean frame relaxed in a way she had rarely seen during their time together. He was wearing jeans and a navy sweater instead of his usual impeccable suits, and he looked peaceful. Younger somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders, but he wasn't alone. A woman sat beside him, petite, blonde, probably in her early 30s. She was laughing at something he had said, her hand resting casually on his arm in a gesture that spoke of familiarity and affection. The sight hit Monét like a physical blow. Her lungs forgot how to work, her heart forgot how to beat, and for a moment she thought she might actually collapse right there on the park path. Of course he had moved on. Of course he had found someone else. Someone who wouldn't accuse him of terrible things. Someone who would trust him. Someone who wouldn't drive him away when he needed support the most. The logical part of her mind knew she should leave. Should walk away quickly before he noticed her and make this situation even more awkward than it already was. But she found herself rooted to the spot, drinking in the sight of him like someone dying of thirst. He looked good, healthy and relaxed and genuinely happy in a way that she realized she had never seen before. During their relationship, there had always been an undercurrent of tension in him. A watchfulness that she now understood had been the hypervigilance of someone constantly looking over his shoulder. As she watched, he threw his head back and laughed at something the woman said, and the sound was pure joy. It was beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time, because she had never been able to give him that kind of uncomplicated happiness. She was so focused on him that she almost missed the moment he saw her. Their eyes met across the distance, and she watched as recognition, surprise, and a dozen other emotions flickered across his features in rapid succession. The laughter died on his lips, and for a moment he looked as stunned as she felt. The woman beside him noticed his change in demeanor and followed his gaze. When she saw Monét, her expression grew curious rather than hostile, which somehow made everything worse. If she had been jealous or possessive, Monét might have been able to hate her. Instead, she looked kind and genuinely concerned for Gavin's well-being. For a long moment, nobody moved. They simply stared at each other across the park like figures in a painting, frozen in a moment of profound recognition and loss. Then Gavin said something to his companion and stood up. Monét's first instinct was to run. Her second was to stay and fight for what they had lost. In the end, she did neither, simply standing there as he walked toward her with that familiar, fluid grace, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his expression unreadable. "Monét," he said when he reached her, and her name in his voice was both balm and blade. "Hello, Gavin." She was surprised by how steady her own voice sounded. "You look well." "So do you." His piercing eyes searched her face with an intensity that made her knees weak. "How have you been?" The question was simple, but loaded with months of unspoken history. How could she possibly answer? How could she tell him that she had been existing rather than living? That every day felt like swimming through molasses? That she had replayed their last conversation 1,000 times, wishing she could take back every word? "Busy," she said instead. "Work has been consuming." He nodded as if he understood exactly what she meant. "I heard about your promotion." "Congratulations, you deserve it." The fact that he had been keeping track of her career sent a warm flutter through her chest, followed immediately by a sharp pang of loss. Of course he would know. He had always believed in her abilities more than she believed in herself. "Thank you." She glanced over his shoulder toward the bench where his companion waited patiently. I don't want to keep you from your friend. Something flickered in his expression. That's Emma, my sister. The words hit her like a lightning bolt. Sister, not girlfriend, not new love interest, not replacement for what they had lost. Sister, your sister, she repeated faintly, remembering suddenly the framed photo that had sat on his desk, a young woman with blonde hair and a bright smile that she had never looked at closely enough to recognize. She flew in from Seattle for the weekend. I've been telling her about Chicago, showing her around. His voice was carefully neutral, but she caught the subtext. He had been telling his sister about Chicago, which meant he had been talking about his life here, which meant he had probably been talking about her. The thought made her heart race with dangerous hope. She's beautiful, Monét said, because she needed to say something and it was true. She'd like you, Gavin replied quietly. She has good instincts about people. The implication hung in the air between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. If his sister would like her, it meant he had spoken about her in positive terms. It meant that despite everything that had happened, despite the accusations and the pain, he didn't hate her. Gavin, she started, then stopped, overwhelmed by the magnitude of everything she wanted to say. I know, he said gently. Janet Wu reached out to me a few months ago. She told me what you found, what you learned about Meridian. Monét felt heat flood her cheeks. She shouldn't have. Yes, she should have. His voice was firm but not angry. You deserve to know the truth. I should have told you from the beginning, but I was trying to protect you. Trying to keep you out of it until I could gather enough evidence to expose what Morrison Industries was doing. Were you right? About the fraud? A grim smile crossed his features. Morrison Industries was shut down by the SEC 3 weeks ago. Turns out they were running a Ponzi scheme that would have made Bernie Madoff jealous. Your firm's partnership with them was legitimate, but they were using your reputation to lend credibility to their operations, while they bilked investors out of millions. Oh my God. The full implications hit her like a tidal wave. If you hadn't been investigating them, Pierce Associates would have been implicated when it all came crashing down. Your reputation, your career, everything you've worked for would have been destroyed. His eyes held hers steadily. I couldn't let that happen. The sacrifice implicit in his words took her breath away. He had risked everything, his cover, his safety, his relationship with her, to protect her firm from scandal. He had endured her accusations and walked away from the woman he loved to keep her from being dragged down with him. Why didn't you tell me? She whispered. Because I was a coward. The admission was stark, honest. Because I was afraid that if you knew who I really was, what I had been through, you wouldn't want to be with me anymore. Because I thought I could handle it alone, the way I always had. Tears blurred her vision. And because I accused you of being exactly what you've spent years fighting against. That hurt, he admitted quietly. But I understood why you did it. Trust doesn't come easily when you've been burned before, and I had given you every reason to be suspicious with my secrecy. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of 6 months of separation and misunderstanding settling between them like dust after an explosion. Around them, the park continued its cheerful spring bustle, but they existed in a bubble of their own making, a space outside of time where old wounds could finally begin to heal. I'm sorry, Monét said finally, the words inadequate but necessary. I'm so sorry, Gavin, for not trusting you, for not believing in you, for walking away when I should have stayed and fought for us. We both made mistakes, he replied gently. I should have been honest from the beginning, should have trusted you enough to let you in. I was so used to handling things alone that I forgot what it meant to be part of a partnership. Partnership. The word hung between them, loaded with possibility and hope. Is it too late? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. For us, I mean. Have I destroyed something that can't be repaired? For a long moment, he didn't answer. His eyes searched her face as if he was looking for something specific, some sign or reassurance that she couldn't identify. I don't know, he said finally, and her heart plummeted. What we had before, we can't go back to that. Too much has happened, too much has changed. We're not the same people we were 6 months ago. She nodded, trying to swallow past the boulder that had lodged itself in her throat. I understand. But, he continued, and that single word made her heart leap. Maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing. Maybe we needed to break apart to figure out how to fit back together properly. What are you saying? A small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth, the first real smile she had seen from him today. I'm saying that I never stopped loving you, Monét, not for a single day. And if you're willing to try again, to start over and build something new and honest and strong, then maybe it's not too late after all. The tears that had been threatening finally spilled over, streaming down her cheeks as relief and joy and overwhelming love crashed over her in equal measure. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I want to try. I love you too, Gavin. I never stopped either. He stepped closer then, close enough that she could smell his cologne, could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could count the individual lashes that framed them. It won't be easy, he warned softly. Starting over never is. We'll have to learn to trust each other all over again, learn to communicate better, learn to be vulnerable in ways that terrify us both. I know, she said, reaching up to cup his face in her hands, but we're both different people now. Stronger, more honest, more willing to fight for what matters. And what matters? He asked, though his smile suggested he already knew the answer. This, she said simply. Us, whatever we can build together. When he kissed her, it was different from their first kiss in that conference room 6 months and a lifetime ago. That kiss had been about discovery, about the electric thrill of something new and unexpected. This kiss was about choice, the conscious decision to forgive and be forgiven, to trust and be trusted, to love with full knowledge of the cost and commitment required. His lips were soft and warm and achingly familiar, and when she kissed him back, it felt like coming home after the longest journey. She poured 6 months of loneliness and regret and desperate hope into that kiss, and when they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Your sister is probably wondering what's happening, Monét said, glancing over his shoulder. Emma's been telling me for months that I was an idiot for not fighting harder to get you back, Gavin admitted with a rueful laugh. She's probably thrilled right now. As if summoned by his words, Emma appeared at his elbow, her bright smile confirming his prediction. I take it this is the famous Monét I've heard so much about? Heat flooded Monét's cheeks, but Emma's warmth was impossible to resist. I hope you heard at least a few good things. Only good things, Emma assured her. My brother might be many things, but he's never been one to hold grudges, especially not against someone who clearly means the world to him. Gavin's arm slipped around Monét's waist, pulling her close against his side, and she marveled at how perfectly she still fit there, as if her body remembered the exact shape of his even after months apart. So what happens now? She asked, looking up at him. Now, he said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head, we take it one day at a time. We learn to be honest with each other, even when it's hard. We build something new and better than what we had before. And we start with dinner, Emma interjected cheerfully. I'm starving, and I want to hear all about how you two fell in love the first time so I can give you advice on how to do it better. The second time around. Monét laughed, the first real laugh she had managed in months. I think I like your sister. I told you she had good instincts, Gavin replied, and the love in his voice as he looked at her made her heart soar. As they walked through the park together, Gavin's hand warm in hers, Monét felt something she hadn't experienced in months, genuine hope for the future. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time since that terrible night at Rossetti's, she believed they could walk it together. 1 year later, the conference room on the 32nd floor of Pierce Associates was exactly the same as it had been that night over a year ago, when Gavin had first told Monét he was falling for her. The same floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the same glittering Chicago skyline. The same polished table reflected the same warm lighting. But everything else had changed. Monét sat across from Gavin, laptop open, documents spread between them, ostensibly reviewing the quarterly reports that had just come in. But her attention kept drifting to the man across from her fiancé now, though the word still sent a thrill through her every time she thought it. The ring on her finger caught the light as she reached for her coffee cup, the simple solitaire that he had chosen with characteristic thoughtfulness. He had proposed 3 months ago, not with grand gestures or public displays, but quietly, privately, in the kitchen of their shared apartment while she was making breakfast and he was reading the newspaper aloud to her. It had been perfect because it had been them, real, honest, grounded in the quiet intimacy they had worked so hard to rebuild. You're not paying attention, he said without looking up from his laptop, but she could hear the smile in his voice. I'm paying attention to something, she replied, not bothering to hide her own grin. Is that something more important than the Henderson merger? Much more important. He looked up then, meeting her gaze across the table, and the love she saw there still had the power to steal her breath. It was different now than it had been in the beginning. Deeper, more certain, tempered by trial and strengthened by choice. We should probably actually get some work done, she said half-heartedly. Probably, he agreed, making no move to return to his laptop. They had found their way back to each other slowly, carefully, with the deliberate patience of people who knew exactly how precious and fragile love could be. There had been long conversations about trust and vulnerability, about the importance of honesty even when it was uncomfortable. There had been setbacks and doubts, moments when old fears threatened to resurface. But there had also been breakthrough moments. The first time he had shared a childhood memory without her having to ask. The first time she had voiced a worry about their relationship instead of letting it fester in silence. The first time they had fought and then worked through it together. He had taken a new position with the Securities and Exchange Commission, using his experience and expertise to investigate corporate fraud from the inside of the justice system rather than as a lone whistleblower. The work was meaningful and legitimate, and more importantly, it was something they could talk about openly. No more secrets, no more half-truths, no more mysterious late-night meetings that left her wondering who he really was. She had learned to trust not just him, but her own judgment about people. The experience with Gavin had taught her that sometimes the most important truths were the ones that couldn't be found in surveillance photos or background checks, but only in the quiet moments when someone thought no one was watching. I have something for you, he said suddenly, reaching into his briefcase. It's not my birthday. It doesn't have to be your birthday for me to give you something. He pulled out a small wrapped package and slid it across the table to her. Inside the wrapping was a book, a slim volume of Pablo Neruda's poetry, worn with age and use. She opened it to the first page and found an inscription in Gavin's careful handwriting. For Monét, you asked me once if any of it was real. Every word, every moment, every heartbeat. Love always. Gavin tears blurred her vision as she looked up at him. This is your copy, isn't it? The one you were reading the day we met. He nodded. I wanted you to have it. As a reminder that some things are worth fighting for, worth waiting for, worth the risk of being vulnerable. She stood and walked around the table to him, settling onto his lap the way she had that first night when they had danced to music. Only they could hear. His arms came around her immediately, holding her close, and she pressed her face against his neck, breathing in the scent that had become synonymous with home. I love you, she whispered against his skin. I love you too, he replied, his voice rough with emotion. More than I ever thought possible, more than I ever knew I was capable of. She pulled back to look at him, this man who had once been a mystery and was now the most certain thing in her life. No more secrets? No more secrets, he promised solemnly. No more lies, no more half-truths, no more trying to protect you by keeping you in the dark. And no more assuming the worst when things don't make sense? No more assumptions. When we don't understand something, we ask. When we're scared, we talk about it. When we're hurt, we work through it together. She kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promises for their future. Around them, the city sparkled in the darkness, full of stories and secrets and possibilities. But in their small circle of light, surrounded by the ghosts of their past mistakes and the hope of their shared future, there was only truth, only love, only the quiet certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. So, she said when they broke apart, should we actually review those quarterly reports? In a minute, he said, pulling her closer. Right now, I just want to hold you and remember how close we came to losing this. But we didn't lose it, she reminded him, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. We found our way back to each other. Yes, he agreed. We did. Outside the conference room windows, Chicago glittered and hummed with the energy of 8 million people living their lives, making their choices, taking their chances on love and hope and the possibility of happiness. And in one small room high above the city, two people who had learned the hard way that love wasn't always easy, but was always worth fighting for, held each other close and planned their future one honest word at a time. The misunderstanding that had once threatened to destroy them had instead become the foundation of something stronger and truer than either had dared to imagine. They had been broken apart and put back together, and in the rebuilding they had become not just lovers but true partners, two people. who had chosen each other not just in the easy moments but in the difficult ones, not just when love felt effortless, but when it required courage. And as they sat together in the same room where their love story had begun, they both knew that this was only the beginning of their real story, the one they would write together, one day, one choice, one honest moment at a time. If you enjoyed this story, kindly like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more. See you next time.